Welcome to session 4 of Fostering the Harvest, and we have some very important information to talk about in this session. Hopefully that will alleviate some fears and free you a little bit. Sometimes our culture bogs us down and ties us up where that need not necessarily be so. But there are some cautions to observe as we mix it up and build relationships to move people toward Christ-likeness in the context of those relationships out in the world. So the title of our session is In the World, but Not of the World. A number of years ago, when I was practicing law, I had a couple come into my office and shared with me a story of a bit of an ordeal that their family had been through. They had visited the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. Those of you who are not in the eastern U.S., Baltimore became a very kind of dirty, ugly, gray industrial town years ago, and they underwent an urban renewal project and developed a beautiful waterfront with docks, and they have an old clipper ship or some sort of large ship, Ironsides type ship there. And there are shops and all the rest. This family of 4 went down to the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. And as they were walking along the docks, the little girl saw a hairy, furry little thing come skittering along the docks, and she picked it up and she was like, "Oh, he's so cute, Daddy." Inevitable question, can we keep him? And the father, being the responsible man that he was, said, "Well, someone may have lost this little dog. We need to report it to the authorities." So they went. Nobody had reported a missing dog. It had no tag, no ID. So he gave his business card to the authorities and said, "Listen, we live north here in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. If somebody comes calling for this dog, we'll be glad to bring it back." It was kind of one of those Lhasa Asa looking type things, long hair everywhere like a mop. So they took the little fella home. And the family already had a family cat, so that didn't go down real well. The family cat, after a couple days, disappeared. But the children loved this little dog, and particularly when they would hop into the bathtub, he would, come up and he'd just jump in and swim around with them in the bath, and they thought that was great fun. After a couple of weeks, the father, being the responsible man that he was, said, "Look, children, we need to get proper shots and an ID tag and so forth for this little fella." So they went to the veterinarian's office. The vet took the little animal in the back and came out after about a half an hour, 35 minutes. "Where did you get this animal?" "He was running around on the docks of the Inner Harbor in Baltimore." I don't know how to tell you this, but this is not a dog. This is a very rare form of an Australian river rat. Must have come across on one of the ships. And the father's thinking, no wonder he likes swimming around in the bath with my children, And the vet said, "We can't allow you to take this home. Obviously, if it would get out and breed in the rat population, have a lot of large hairy rats running around the Philadelphia area. In fact, I've called the University of Pennsylvania. They've asked for the animal. They will put it down and dissect it for research purposes." Well, okay, they were a little sad to let the animal go, but not so sad because it wasn't a dog at all. After a couple of weeks, the veterinarian called the father up. He said they did the research on this little fella at the University of Penn. "Did you own a cat?" They had found remnants of cat bone in his stomach. He had eaten the family cat. Now, why do I share this story with you other than to totally gross you out? Well, the truth is this. Listen. This family made a presumption and then entered upon a course of conduct based on that presumption that took them off into error and potentially harmful behavior. In our lives, when we come to Scripture, the Word of God, it's plain, it's clear enough, but oftentimes we look at things skew, or we've only heard one passage as not said against other passages, and we can come up with wrong ideas. This is one of the classic examples of Christians when they start building relationships with unbelievers, that their church leaders, other Christians will look at them with an eyebrow up and not exactly understand what you are trying to do by building relationships with unbelievers. One of the critical things we need to understand from the very beginning is that your neighbor's life a great guy as he is with his kids and all the rest, although he is next door to you, or perhaps the next Carol over in the office, there is a gulf between you and him, the gulf of unfamiliarity. There's a lot you don't know about him. Often the soil of his heart needs some cultivating, some conditioning. Seed falling on hard ground tends to just bounce around. It doesn't sink in. And you can be part of that cultivation process. But thirdly, you need to realize also there are thickets in this guy's life. He's got a bit of a dark side. He's got sins that he's involved. Some are very in your face and apparent. Others are more subtle. But as you get into a relationship, build a relationship with him or with her, you're going to find some things that you need to be careful about, need to be cautious about. One critical thing from the very foundation you need to realize is that there is a difference between the world of unbelievers and unbelievers in the world. The world of unbelievers and unbelievers in the world. I have been at churches where they say, do not build friendships with unbelievers. They hate us. Jesus said, they hate me, they will hate you. And there's a fundamental misunderstanding there. A couple of passages I've highlighted for you here on the first page of this session. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. It says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Contrast that with John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Same Greek word for love, same Greek word for world. In one instance, love not the world, but then God loved the world. What's the difference? Very carefully, I want you to understand, one is a world system, the other are unbelievers within that world system. First we're going to look at is the world of unbelievers. These basically are anti-God leaders. The world, of course, is a system of ideas, people, and institutions that are hostile toward God. In John 15, 18 to 19, Jesus said, the world hated me. Now, is that everyone in the world? No. We know that thousands of people, perhaps tens of thousands, loved Jesus. The little children loved. What was he talking about? He was talking about a world system that is committed to self-righteousness or no God or whatever. The world system hated me. It will also hate you. And in 1 John 2, the things, verses 15 to 17, the things that are in the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, pride of life. What does the world say go for? Possessions, positions, pleasures. That is the world system. That is the world's values. Go for possessions, go for positions, go for pleasures. You only go around once in life, okay? That is classic of the world system. These people are not just going along with the flow. These people are actually philosophically, they have their act together, but it's together against the Lord. They typically look like this lady here, kind of giving you the stare, you know what I mean? Now, Paul says that we should separate from them. If we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 17, we will see that he says, come ye out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch not the unclean thing. For what fellowship, do believers have with this system? So we are to actually separate from them in the sense of not developing too much of friendship. Normally, it's not a problem so much of you pushing them off. Normally, they will push you off. But you will have to be committed to a resolute kindness. Now, the proponents of this system are typically the media, movies, music, public education, and those who are leaders in the media, those who are leaders in Hollywood, those who are leaders in the music industry, those who are leaders in public education. You will find them dead set against Christianity, against the Bible, against God, etc. These are the people who are pretty harsh. Our job is to show them resolute kindness and love, to wait for a break. Oftentimes what happens is that these people will end up having some kind of need. Something will happen, a car accident, the death of a loved one, or whatever else, and there will be a softening, and we'll be talking about that in the next session. So, the world of unbelievers, a system that is harsh, leading people against God. Second group, there are unbelievers in the world. These people are not anti-God leaders, they are pro-self followers. They are born into a world captive to that world system. Most of your neighbors and coworkers are in this category. They believe what they've been told by teachers, by the media, by friends. They believe in evolution because they've never heard another idea. That's all they've heard. When we challenged some of our neighbors if they'd be interested in a Bible study, April, who I'll introduce you to more later on, she said, well, yeah, I'll come, but I'll warn you now, I've got a lot of hard questions. And I said, well, you're not allowed to come unless you've got hard questions. I knew what would come up. And a lot of people want to believe, unbelievers want to believe in God, but they believe you got to check your brains at the door in order to kiss science goodbye. And so the study of creationism is a hugely important thing when it comes to sharing your faith. Now, Paul says, get next to them for the gospel's sake. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 through 11, he says, I told you in an earlier writing not to keep company with the immoral and yada, 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 yada. But I didn't mean immoral unbelievers, because then you'd have to leave the world. But I told you not to keep company with a so-called brother, someone who professes to be a Christian who's immoral. You're to separate from them. But the notion here that we pick up in the text is, yeah, you can't leave the world. You're going to have unbelievers all around you. And I'm not telling you to separate from them. We come alongside of them. In 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 to 23, Paul says, to the Jews I became as a Jew that I might win the Jews. Isn't that an odd statement? Paul was a Jew. And yet he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adapt clothing, behavior, characteristics that are more similar to my target audience. Whether they are Gentiles who have no law, I myself won't be lawless, I won't be immoral, but I'll become kind of Gentile. Fascinating, Acts 17 on Mars Hill. Paul knows that he's not dealing with any audience who believes in a single God or anything having to do with Holy Scripture. So he changes his entire style to adapt to a Gentile audience. I notice you have many idols, many statues here. You're very superstitious. Let me tell you about this statue right here to the unknown God. It's the God I want to tell you about. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant adaptation to the people around him. So build friendships with these neighbors, with these who are part of the world system, unbelievers in the world. They don't mind often learning in an informal way. We build friendships with them. In my experience, now this is not Europe, but this is South Africa and the United States, many want to know, they're curious about the Bible, about God, about creation versus evolution and these types of things. You can get alongside of them and share these concepts. Now, there's a critical question. Who is influencing whom? And you see kind of at the box on the right-hand side of your page, a picture of some firemen. Firemen must go into a building, but they don't go in unprotected. A lot of the Christian approach to evangelism has been the firemen outside with the old, what do they call that? Like a catch net. All the firemen are standing there, jump, jump, but I'm 9 stories up. You don't know how far this is. And unbelievers would say, you don't know how much change this is going to bring to my life. No, you got to jump, Oftentimes, people are not willing to jump. But if we go in, kicking down the doors and working our way through, we can rescue them ourselves or jump with them. But we do not run into a burning building unprotected. These firemen are insulated, but they are not isolated from the people. We got to go in. We got to cultivate a strong relationship with our God that brings holiness and a distinctiveness and a refreshing difference in our life. We cannot go in as carnal Christians and go and mix it up with unbelievers where you can hardly tell the difference between the two of us. We have to go in refreshingly different, but we do have to go in. Some believers who are weak in their spiritual devotion or their self-discipline are susceptible to worldly peer pressure. Our young people in particular, we often tell teenagers, don't make friends with unbelievers, they bring you down. And we have seen that often. That's because, the teenager is like, who am I? What am I going to be? I want to be a veterinarian. No, I want to be a hairstylist. No, I want to be a nuclear physicist. And they're just like, who am I? What am I? Am I liked? Am I accepted? And teenagers are all over the map. You park them next to unbelievers and it's an uphill battle. Some can do it. I knew a young man, went through 4 years public high school, no problem. High school of 4,000 kids, all kinds of temptations, peer pressure, not a problem. Next one, his sister came through, wobble, 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 crash, burn, up and wobble, wobble, very difficult. So every kid is different. But I understand that when you're kind of lacking in your identity, sometimes it gets dangerous. But as an adult, you need to encourage your folks that they need to stand on their spiritual feet sometime. I kind of feel like advocating to Christian college presidents. You've now got your degree from a Christian college. For the last 21, 22 years, we have told you not to make friends with unbelievers. The rule is now changed. Go out there, make friends with as many unbelievers as you possibly can. You're a Christian college graduate. You say, well, brother, that doesn't assure that they're spiritual. Well, that's true. But you know, there comes a time, and as we have now, as the decades roll by, we have an increasing number of Christian school graduates and homeschool people that have come through, and they have been isolated, and they're coming into our churches, and they're continuing as adults to be isolated. They have to learn to be insulated, to go out there and build relationships with unbelievers. There are two constant questions that, as adults or young people, you need to constantly ask yourself. Number one, where's my heart? Number two, where are my feet? How does this look? Well, there's a grid that we've provided for you, again, 4-square grid. Those on the left side have a heart that is of the world, a worldly heart. On the right side, not of the world, not a worldly heart, but a godly heart, spiritual heart. And then above the line are people whose feet are not in the world. They spend their free time with believers all the time. Maybe that's you. As soon as you get off of work, boom, I'm with believers, I'm with believers. And then there are those down below, or below the line, that are in the world. That is, their feet, in their free time, they are mixing it up with unbelievers. So let's look at how it plays out. In the upper left, you have someone whose heart is of the world, but they're not in the world. You say, that's kind of an odd combination. Yeah, it is. Sometimes people in ministry can be this way. I heard recently of a pastor's wife and eventually a missionary wife who was lesbian. I have run into a number of Christian school kids who are like, going through getting A's and B's in Bible class, but man, they just want to be out of there, out of that school. They have a passion for the world, and they're heading for it as soon as they get free. So that would be that group. They're frustrated. Then there's a second group, isolated believers. They're not in the world, and they're not of the world. Isn't it easy for a pastor to be godly? Sitting with other Christian men in the office and a Christian secretary and Christian staff and Christian janitor. They're surrounded by Christians. Well, you say, yeah, but bad things happen in churches as well. Well, that's true. But when you're surrounded in a totally Christian environment, it's a lot easier your heart is not tested, but your feet aren't really tested either. You're kind of isolated. Then there are those who are defeated. There are some Christians who are in the world and of the world. Sometimes they will say, hey man, I got this multiple tattoos, multiple body piercings because I'm trying to develop redemptive relationships. Okay, just chase that out a little bit. How you doing? How many people would you say are contacts? How many people have you led to Christ? And oftentimes in trying to be like the world so as to so perhaps reach the world, what happens is they're not distinctively different. And the world oftentimes expects a Christian to be distinctively different. And so these defeated Christians are an unfortunate casualty of relational evangelism where their heart is not solid. And then lastly, of course, is the insulated Christian, and this is the one we are advocating. Being in the world, but not of the world. Like a fireman. Your feet are in the world, you're mixing it up with unbelievers, but your heart is 100% committed in great love and adoration of Jesus Christ and of our God. Now, there are some verses I've given you to consider that are very, very important. 1 Corinthians 5, verses 9 and 10, a reminder, keep company with unbelievers. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, actually adapt and become like them, but not in a sinful way. 2 Corinthians 6, don't yoke or have fellowship or deep relationships with those who are proponents of the world system. And in 1 Peter 4, verses 3 and 4, which I use a lot in South Africa because as we lead people to Christ, a lot of them are alcoholics. And they're like, but all my friends, and they found the hardest part for some new believers is to realize that their old unbelieving friends, the only thing they really had in common was alcohol. And when they walk away from it, all their friends walk away from them. It's like, dude, was that all that there was? Was alcohol was the glue to our friendship, but in some cases. And it says, don't go to the same excess, but these former unbelieving friends that you had, They will heap abuse on you because you don't go to excess like they used to do. I think it's interesting, and I know I share the views of a lot of missionaries. We are very curious as to when American churches send us out, they say, brother, we want you to go to South Africa. We want you to learn the phrases of South Africa. We want you to learn the culture. We want you to become like them. We want you to, learn their phrases, learn their language, and bring them to Christ. And when we come back to America, we find out that all of that is taboo here. Christians are not allowed to learn their language, to learn the culture, to be with them, and to build relationships so as to win them to Christ. So there's a little bit of schizophrenia in the American church, because what they're telling us, commanding us to do as missionaries on the foreign field, they will not let believers do here in America. And I don't think that's right, and I don't think it's consistent. We are to get beside them. We are to adapt and become like them so that we may win them to Christ. Paul said, it's not easy for me in 1 Corinthians 9, but I do this for the gospel's sake. We do it as missionaries, and it's not because we are missionaries. It's because we are believers trying to win people to Christ. Now, being misunderstood by Christians, you have to understand that there's a natural tendency for Christians to round the wagons up and to cloister. Maybe even a spiritual tendency. Look, Lot vexed his righteous soul, pitching his tent towards Sodom. It's not an easy thing to behold this kind of sin and to listen to that language and so forth. There are ways to get yourself out of the real difficult situations, but generally we have to expose ourselves to these people and their culture and what their values. You come into their home, they're blaring the music over the sound system. That's the way it is. That is the way it is. You say, I don't want my children to hear any profanity. At what point in their lives will your children eventually hear profanity? Do you want to wait? Yeah, your neighborhood kids are going to use profanity, You only think that they don't know what the swear words are. It is all around them. I, frankly, would rather expose my kids to a little bit more of the world while I'm discipling them, rather than cloistering them until they're 22, and all of a sudden, I'm married, I'm out here on my own, and wah, the whole world hits them, and they've had absolutely no exposure to anything outside the Christian box. I remind you again, the question of do you hate sin as well as sinners? We have to learn to separate the two. Some Christians we don't hang around those people. Jesus was guilty by association and was a friend of unbelievers. He took enormous heat for that. Some actually preach, like the Pharisees, preach cloistering and use intimidation to bring conformity. Where's Joe? It's Wednesday night prayer meeting. Where's Joe? He's out there doing some kind of bowling league. He says his brother-in-law's in bowling and he's trying to build relationships with them to lead them to Christ. He needs to be in church. He needs to be here on Wednesday nights. He's a deacon in this church. Whatever else. If you do anything that shows that you're breaking company with the cloister, you're moving outside the fortress and out mixing it up with unbelievers, there are people that are going to not understand. Jesus said, not what goes into the mouth defiles the man, but what comes out of the mouth. When we go into these circles, we are not defiling ourselves by hanging out with unbelievers. However, there are some dark sides that they have that we need to watch out for to make sure that does not actually get in and begin to defile us from within. Here's an illustration we've given you in a graphic. I have my life, my professional world, there's my personal world, and within my personal world is the gospel. The gospel is a personal thing. For some people, it is a deeply personal thing. Okay? You have to understand that in many cases, for instance, in Europe, to talk about the gospel, to talk about God and religion is almost tantamount to talking about sexual intimacy. They're just like, who are you? Don't talk to me. That is a private matter. We will not talk about that. Europe is an interesting place, I waved hi to a guy on the sidewalk in Berlin one time, and he looked at me and says, do I know you? You're gay or some other kind of fruitiness if you even greet someone, because Germans walk with their heads down and they're going exactly where they're going, and no conversation with a person will stop them. Well, then there's your neighbor's life. He also has his professional world, his personal world, but again, he's got inside of him, he's got his thickets, he's got his dark side. In between the two of you, as we mentioned, is this gulf, this wall of unfamiliarity. You may think you know your neighbor, just like you think you know the people you go to church with. But if you ever get inside the homes of some of the people you go to church with, you'll learn, I didn't know them at all. I knew their churchy side, you know. Hi, how you doing? Fine. Good morning, brother. Good to see you. Yeah. How are things going? Great. You too? Yeah, great. Now, I really know them. I've exchanged that greeting for 10 years and now I know them. You don't know them. Same with your neighbors. Oftentimes we have no knowledge of their personal world until we start to converse with them. Now, what we're trying to do is this, and you can see in the second graphic. We're trying to rotate our personal world around our personal life to make contact with their personal life so that we can rotate the gospel around and make contact with their personal life. But at the same time, you have to watch their dark side. Classic point, I'll call him Ron. He was my next door neighbor. He loved to do cars. He built cars. The body, the engines, everything, anything and everything. I knew this much about cars. But guess what? It was time for me to build a conversation with him and to draw on everything that I had. Well, I remember my brother one time had a 68 Camaro SS. And I remember him telling me it was bored out. They do something to the engine to make it bigger. And it had raised heads. He also had header pipes and a posi rear. Now, I generally kind of sort of knew from 30 years earlier from my brother's conversations in the 70s what this meant. So I went over, to Ron. I'm like, cool Mustang, man. 71? Nah, 72. It's got a 305 under there? Yeah, exactly. Is it bored out? Yeah. Raised heads? Yeah. Edelbrock manifold? I remembered that one too. No. It's got a posi rear. He said, he rolls out from underneath the car. I was thinking of getting that. And then he rolls back under. Cool. I was trying to enter into his sphere. Now, the problem with Ron was for a long while, he had girly posters on the walls of his garage. So I could kind of speak to him from this wall where I couldn't see any of that stuff, but it was difficult because to even converse with him, he was always in there and there was always this dark side and I did not want that entering my eye gate. So, prayed about it, waited and so forth. Well, eventually Ron got a girlfriend and girlfriends don't like girly posters on the wall in the garage. So they all came down. I was like, yes, leave it to God. God fixes things, So the idea is to rotate the gospel around, get your personal lives together, but watch out for his dark side. And keep my life very much in tune with God so that I'm walking in godliness. I'm insulated in my heart, but not isolated from my unbelieving neighbors and coworkers.